Okay, this is a book review. Here's the book. It's called Mercury Poisoning, the Undiagnosed Epidemic. Author's name is David Hammond. The reason I was interested in the book is because of mercury amalgams. The book was written in 2013. Okay, so first of all, just a little bit more about the types of mercury. Elemental mercury is like quicksilver, the liquid mercury you can see in rolling on the ground or something. It's used in thermometers because it's heavier than, let's say, water, and a smaller amount of it can be used to move a shorter distance. You know, it's about 13 times as much distance would be moved if you were using water, which would be too big and bulky for things like thermometers and blood pressure gauges. The stuff in the teeth, the amalgams, it's about 50% mercury, and it does vaporize. It comes off the tube. When you inhale it, some of them goes into your nose, and the olfactory nerve carries it right into the brain. It can travel retrograde along neurons. Other parts of it will go into the lung, and then it'll be absorbed into the blood. Can travel all over the body, like to the liver, the kidneys, for example. Oral bacteria can convert it to methyl mercury, just add a methyl group to it. That's called organic mercury. When you add carbon to a molecule, it becomes called organic. By itself, it's the element. Okay, with a negative charge on it by itself, it's ionic. With carbon added to it, it's called organic mercury. So methyl mercury is a type of bacterial conversion that occurs in your mouth to methyl mercury, and it's highly absorbed in the gut. Thimerosal is ethyl mercury. That's often used like in contact lens solution, for example, as a preservative. When you eat fish, fish will have the organic form in them. You'll get organic mercury, like methyl mercury. Chronic exposure to that can lead to tremors and excess salivation. So some people think they got Parkinson's, they don't know why. It might just be from eating fish. They got a tremor from eating fish. They should stop eating fish. Get their amalgams pulled out of their mouth if they have them. Okay. Mercury's got a very high affinity for sulfur, hydrogen, thiol groups, or sulfur compounds, disulfide bonds. So what you want to do is you want to minimize your exposure to mercury, but be aware of that it binds to the sulfur groups, because like in the mitochondria, you got iron sulfur centers that are important for transmitting electrons on the inner mitochondrial membrane. So mercury will come in, it's got a stronger affinity for that sulfur group, and it'll displace the iron from it. And then you got the iron drops into the matrix as free iron, so you got a double bad combination. The mercury disrupting the iron sulfur complex prevents electron transport in the inner mitochondrial membrane, and simultaneously you're dropping free iron into the matrix, and that can redox cycle, ferrous redox cycle, Fe2 plus Fe3 plus, releasing electrons, and also activating the Fenton reaction to produce hydroxyl radicals, a type of oxidative stress which can damage the inner mitochondrial membrane. So it's a double bad. Mercury also inhibits the uptake of glutamate by neurons, so that's bad. Okay, because what that means is the glutamate is going to continue to accumulate in the region of the synapse and adjacent to the synapse, and that can overactivate the postsynaptic neuron, because glutamate's by far the most common excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. 90% of excitatory neurotransmitters in the cerebral cortex, for example. So what that can lead to is overactivation of that postsynaptic neuron. You activate a neuron too much, its metabolic rate goes too high, it can't keep up with that, and the cell can die. It'll go into apoptosis. So what I'm trying to say here is excitotoxin, glutamate in excessive amounts is an excitotoxin. Mercury causing excessive glutamate because it's blocking its uptake is thus functioning like an excitotoxin. Okay, aspartame can be an excitotoxin. MSG, MFG in processed food can be excitotoxins. Glyphosate can be an excitotoxin because it'll bind to the glycine receptor on the NMDA channel for calcium that typically glutamate binds to, and glycine. So those all can function as excitotoxins and overstimulate the postsynaptic nerve. And some people tried to deny that mercury gets out of amalgams and gets into the human's body. They've shown in sheep and in monkeys it goes all over the place, okay? And, there's no reason to think the same thing doesn't occur in humans, all right? Mercury causes synergistically increased amounts of toxicity from other simultaneous heavy metals like lead. In Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, they banned the use of mercury in dental amalgams. One of the most interesting things in the book was talking about testing a person for mercury exposure. And the key point was conventional tests like blood and urine, they're not really indicative of the total body burden. Meaning if you have an acute exposure, you can have transient elevated blood and urine mercury. But that really doesn't matter so much. What matters is the chronic exposure, more something that gives you a sense of the total body burden and the likelihood of having mercury in your brain. And you can get a much better sense of that by checking the hair levels, okay? And a lot of times people will get tested just in the blood and the urine, and they'll have a low level or a normal level, and people think, oh, they don't have a mercury problem. That's completely untrue. Check their hair. They could have a major problem. So the point is check the hair because it's more of a long-term indicator of mercury exposure and thus able to detect chronic mercury poisoning. Most common source of mercury poisoning is from amalgams, but it's also a common source is from eating too much fish, eating fish at all. There's other sources, coal burning electric plants, mining exposures, some old school medications and stuff. High fructose corn syrup pushed through a chloralkali vat is often contaminated with mercury, for example. You can also test for urinary porphyrins. That's a little bit more of a specialized test. But you can do chelation testing, but you don't want to do chelation testing if they've got amalgams, which are 50% mercury, because the chelator is going to pull it out of the amalgams, so you're just increasing the rate of it being pulled out to the body. Girls with amalgams excreted 30% more mercury in their urine than did boys. And this is thought to help explain why boys are significantly more susceptible to mercury poisoning than girls are. And this is thought to explain why some diseases thought associated with mercury poisoning are much more common in boys than in girls. The author speculates that the protective effect of homozygous ApoE4 gene for preventing Alzheimer's disease is due to this version of the apolipoprotein to have more sulfur hydrogen groups on it, thus more ability to attract mercury and help remove it from the body. So that's thought to be a reason why ApoE4 homozygous, meaning from the mother and from the father both, it has a bit of a protective effect against Alzheimer's, with the implication being that mercury sensitivity and overload is associated with causing Alzheimer's. Okay, there's different authors who think it's largely due to aluminum, and there's different authors who think it's really more of a vascular disease, the vascular hypothesis of Alzheimer's, which is the work of Jack Delacouture. And I think cognitive decline is multifactorial. Obviously, there's so many things that can cause brain damage. They can have an additive effect. Mercury poisoning can be associated with chronic fatigue, irritability, insomnia, leg cramps, hypothyroidism. You can see how it could be associated with irritability and insomnia, given that it can function as an excitotoxin that totally fits. Dietary selenium might have a protective effect versus mercury poisoning. Sweat's a good way to get mercury out of the body. You sweat it out in your sweat glands. I think that's a real good idea. It's pretty easy to do. And the goal would be just to try to excrete more every day than you take in, and hopefully stay ahead of it in that way. So anyways, that's the book here, Mercury Poisoning. And what I liked about it was he spent a lot of time going over the testing and all that kind of stuff for it. Anyways, hope you found that helpful.